The wind swept across the dusty plains that afternoon, carrying with it the scent of sweat, horses, and greed. At the edge of the marketplace, beneath the ragged banners that fluttered like torn promises, a woman stumbled forward, her wrists bound in coarse rope, her face streaked with dirt and silent tears. Her name was Clara, though few here bothered to know it. To most of the men gathering around, she was nothing more than another body to be bought, another woman to be traded like cattle. Her brother Thomas stood behind her with a crooked smile, one hand gripping the rope and the other already outstretched for coin. He had been her guardian since their parents died, but over time, liquor, debt, and darkness had twisted him into something unrecognizable, something cruel. To him, Clara was no longer a sister, no longer blood. She was his way out, his last chance at silver. "Step right up," he shouted, his voice booming with false charm. "A fine woman here, strong enough to work your land, young enough to give you sons, obedient enough to keep your house." His words slithered like poison across the dirt, and Clara winced as laughter and greedy eyes pressed in closer. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but her hands were bound, and her spirit had been crushed by betrayal. The world blurred until all she could feel was the rough tug of the rope biting into her skin. Just as the bidding began, just as men started tossing numbers into the air, a figure stepped through the crowd, tall and steady, his boots sinking into the dust with each deliberate stride. He was a cowboy, broad-shouldered and sun-browned, the kind of man who didn't need to announce himself, because his very presence commanded silence. His hat tilted low, shadowing his eyes. But when he looked up, his gaze was sharp as steel and unshakable as the mountains in the distance. He didn't glance at the other men, didn't acknowledge Thomas's greedy grin. His eyes went straight to Clara, to the fear trembling in her chest, to the desperation she tried so hard to hide. And in that moment, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Kindness, not lust. Strength, not cruelty. Protection, not possession. The cowboy spoke, his voice low but firm, and the sound of it cut through the noise like thunder splitting the sky. "I'll take her," he said, "not as a buyer, not as a man purchasing a slave, but as someone reclaiming what should never have been for sale." Thomas smirked, rubbing his hands together. "You'll take her? Then pay her price, cowboy. Every woman has one." The cowboy didn't argue. He reached into his worn leather satchel, pulled out a pouch heavy with coin, and tossed it at Thomas's chest. The clinking sound rang out like judgment, like the final toll of a bell. Thomas caught it, his eyes gleaming with greed, and he shoved Clara forward as though she were nothing more than a sack of grain. She stumbled, nearly falling face first into the dust, but a strong arm caught her. The cowboy's grip was steady, warm, unshakable, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey. He steadied her, lifted her chin with gentle fingers, and spoke words that melted the chains of shame wrapped around her heart. "You're mine now," he said softly so only she could hear. But not like he meant. "You're mine because you're safe, because no one will ever hurt you again." Clara blinked, her tears spilling freely now, not from despair but from the fragile bloom of hope. Around them the crowd grumbled, disappointed at the lack of spectacle. But no one dared challenge the cowboy. He radiated a strength that warned them he was not to be tested. He took her hand, cutting the rope from her wrists with his knife, the blade flashing in the sun. And when the bonds fell to the ground, she felt a weight lift from her soul. She was free, though she barely knew what freedom felt like anymore. Thomas, already counting his silver, sneered. "You paid too much for a broken woman," he muttered. But the cowboy turned his head, his voice cutting with quiet fire. "No woman is broken. She just needs someone to remind her of her worth." Those words struck Clara harder than any slap ever had. Not because they hurt, but because they healed. For the first time, she felt like someone saw her, not as property, not as a burden, but as a person. The cowboy led her away, past the gawking crowd, past the banners and the dust, until the noise faded behind them. His horse waited just beyond, a strong chestnut with a calm gaze, and he lifted her onto the saddle as though she weighed nothing at all. Then he climbed up behind her, his arm a shield around her fragile frame. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice cracking like dry wood. He glanced toward the horizon where the sun painted the sky with gold. "Home," he answered simply, "to a place where you'll never be sold, never be chained, never be silenced again. From now on, you're my own, not because I bought you, but because I choose you." His words sank deep into her weary heart, planting seeds of courage she thought had long withered. She didn't know his name, didn't know his past, but she knew she could trust him. And as the horse carried them away, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was finally over and a new chapter had begun. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time in her life, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. The cowboy tightened his hold slightly, as if promising the whole world would have to go through him before it could touch her again. Behind them, the market dissolved into dust, Thomas's greed swallowed by the very silence he had once controlled. Ahead of them stretched open fields, wild freedom, and the chance to build a life not of chains, but of choice. Clara's tears dried, replaced by the quiet smile of a woman who had been broken but was beginning to heal, because someone had stepped forward when no one else did. Someone had seen her, valued her, and called her his own, not to own, but to protect, to cherish, to love. And though the road ahead would be long, she knew that as long as the cowboy rode beside her, she would never again walk it alone. The trail stretched endlessly before them, winding through valleys of golden grass that shimmered in the late afternoon sun, the air carrying the scent of wild sage and distant rain. Clara sat in silence, her body still tense though her wrists were free, her heart beating like a frightened bird in her chest. The cowboy, his name she learned was Daniel, rode with the steady calm of a man who knew both the dangers of the land and the storms of the human soul. His arm remained firm around her waist, not tight, not demanding, but protective, steadying her as though he knew she hadn't stood on her own ground in years. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, afraid to speak, afraid that if she opened her mouth, the fragile dream would shatter, and she would wake up once more in her brother's grasp. But Daniel seemed to sense her fear, his deep voice rumbling low in her ear, carrying more comfort than she thought words could hold. "You don't owe me a word until you're ready," he said softly. "But you should know one thing. Clara, you belong to no one but yourself. I may have paid silver to free you, but the moment those ropes fell, your life became yours again. All I'm asking is to ride beside you, to give you shelter until you can stand tall on your own." The words stunned her, because no man she had ever met had spoken of her as though she had the right to choose, the right to breathe freely, the right to exist as more than a servant or an object. Her lips parted, but only a whisper escaped. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Daniel shifted slightly in the saddle, his gaze fixed forward, but his tone carried weight like stone laid carefully on stone. "Because once, a long time ago, someone did it for me. I was a boy with no one, beaten down, sold off like I was nothing, and then a stranger stepped in. Not because I was worth money, not because I had something to give, but because he believed no soul deserved to be treated as less than human. He gave me a chance, and I swore that if I ever came across another soul in chains, I'd do the same. I don't need to know you to know you're worth saving." His confession struck Clara deep, stirring something she thought had died, a flicker of trust. She turned her head slightly, studying his profile beneath the brim of his hat. His face bore the lines of a man who had weathered storms both outside and inside. But there was no cruelty in his eyes, no hunger, no greed, only quiet strength. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "I don't even remember what freedom feels like," she admitted in a trembling voice. "It feels foreign. Like I don't know what to do with it." Daniel's arm shifted just enough to squeeze her, sighed gently. "Then you'll learn," he said. "Step by step, sunrise by sunrise. Freedom isn't something you earn, Clara. It's something you already have. You've just been kept from it too long." The horse carried them into the gathering dusk, where the sky bled from gold into deep crimson, and the stars began to prick through like lanterns in the heavens. They camped by a stream that whispered over smooth stones, the fire crackling between them, throwing shadows on Daniel's rugged features. Clara sat wrapped in his coat, too large for her slight frame, but its warmth seeped into her bones. She watched him prepare the meal with practiced ease, the movements of a man who had lived on the land, self-sufficient, strong, and patient. The silence between them was not heavy, but strangely soothing, like the quiet lull of a lullaby long forgotten. When he finally spoke, his words carried not judgment, but invitation. "Tell me about you if you're ready. Not the hurt he caused you, not the shame he tried to sell you in, but who you really are." What you dreamed of before the world tried to take it away. Clara stared into the fire, the flames dancing like memories in her eyes. For a long time she said nothing, afraid to remember, afraid the fire might burn away the fragile threads holding her together. But slowly, haltingly, she began to speak. She told him of her childhood before her parents died, of the way her mother's hands smelled of lavender, of the songs her father used to hum while working the land. She spoke of laughter once shared with Thomas before he turned bitter, of the small fragile dreams she once had of teaching children, of painting sunsets with colors she had only seen in her mind. The words felt strange, like stepping into sunlight after years locked in shadow. But Daniel listened as though every syllable mattered. Not once did he interrupt, not once did he brush off her pain. He let her pour herself out like water from a cracked jar, and instead of trying to fix it, he simply held space for her, his eyes steady, his presence unshaken. When she finished, her voice small and raw, Daniel poked the fire and said simply, "Those dreams aren't gone, Clara. They've just been waiting for you to breathe life into them." Again, something broke inside her then, not a painful break, but a freeing one. She pressed her hands to her face and wept openly, her shoulders shaking, years of silence spilling into the night. And when she finally lifted her gaze, she found Daniel still there, still watching, his expression not pity but respect. "Thank you," she whispered, the words small but full of weight. "For seeing me, for not turning away." He nodded once, his jaw tight as though holding back emotions of his own. "Always," he said. "You deserve that much." The night passed slowly, the fire dying down to embers, the stars wheeling silently above, and as Clara lay wrapped in his coat, drifting into the first peaceful sleep she'd known in years, she realized something remarkable. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of her brother, not of the chains, not of the world that had once swallowed her whole. Because now she had hope, fragile but real. And beside her sat a man who had not only paid her price, but had given her something worth more than silver, her dignity, her freedom, her chance at life again. When dawn came, painting the sky with pink and gold, Daniel saddled the horse once more and held out his hand to her. She placed her smaller hand in his, her grip still trembling but stronger than before. As he lifted her into the saddle, his words echoed with promise. "From this day forward, Clara, you walk in freedom, and no man will ever take that from you. Again, not while I draw breath." And with that, they rode toward the rising sun, two souls no longer bound by chains of the past, but joined by something far greater, hope, courage, and the beginning of a story that had only just begun.